In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war. On orders from the Kremlin, Russia had launched one of history's most drastic political, moral, and economic wars, a Cold War.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History, Global World Studies. We're going to try to do a 10 to 15 minute lecture. Ooh, it's cold in here. That's because we're going to do the Cold War. We're going to just take a look at the major themes of the Cold War, including economic ideology, how it developed, who was involved, a couple of events, and its conclusion. Just so we can get you some basic information. This will probably be not enough to do a really great thematic essay, but it should be enough to stumble your way through the multiple choice and hopefully put a couple wrinkles in your brain so you feel like it was worth it. And I always remind my students, where attention goes, energy flows. So if you're going to watch with all of your attention, okay? 80% isn't probably going to do it. So here we go. Let's look at the Cold War. The Cold War developed out of World War II. So if you know the World War II thing a little bit, you know that the United States, England, and the Soviet Union were allies. That FDR and Churchill, who were kind of alike, they're kind of Democrats, were elected anyway, right? Are in an alliance system with the devil. The Red Devil, Joseph Stalin, mass murderer of his own people, totalitarian dictator, command economy, kill you with a gun kind of guy, for frenemy reasons. I mean, he had to be our friend, but he was our enemy because we were fighting Hitler. So as World War II was ending, the three leaders met at a conference at Yalta. It's called the Yalta Summit, or the Yalta Meeting. And the Yalta Meeting was at the end of the war to kind of collaborate about what was going to happen to end the war and what would happen post-war. The fear was that as soon as World War II was over, we were going to be at it with the Soviet Union, and FDR didn't want that, and Churchill didn't want that. So we wanted to find a way to see if we could settle things at Yalta. And basically what was done was that Stalin promised to have free elections if he could keep his army in Eastern Europe. Now, him having free elections is like a goat, singing, Rockabye Baby. It ain't gonna happen. So, that was nonsensical. So really, kind of the theory that I see it by is I kind of see it almost like if this was Europe, yours, mine. That's kind of what happened at Yalta. We really created the Iron Curtain, the metaphorical separation of Europe and then now the world into two camps. And the camps that are going to be controlled by the communists and camps that are going to be more controlled by the United States and England. And that is the Cold War. Never in the Cold War does the United States attack the Soviet Union. It's always through these kind of other events. So ideological reasons. The United States and England are democracies. We elect leaders and we have capitalism as the root of our economic system, meaning that freedom is the most important concept in our ideology. Freedom before taxes, freedom before we arrest, before speech, speech before law. I mean, what's more important? That you have freedom of speech or that we don't hurt the president's feelings? It's freedom of speech. Whereas in the Soviet Union, it's going to be order before freedom. It's more important to be safe, secure, and stable. So freedom of speech out the window, freedom of press out the window, and all that good stuff. China, also communist by the 1950s. So a couple of Cold War events. There's more than a few. Right after the Cold War occurred, when it started, Germany was split at Yalta. So you had the situation of Stalin controlling East Germany and West Germany being controlled by more of the Allied powers, or England and the United States. The problem was that they also split Berlin. And if you look at the map right here, you can see where Berlin is. Berlin's on the other side. So this would be like if these were gangs, and let's just say for argument's sake that if this was the Bloods and the Crips, you know who the Bloods are. The commies, because they're red. And if we were the Crips, the Blue Boys, right? Where is half of our main clubhouse? In the Sea of Red. So one of the Cold War events is called the Berlin Blockade. And what Stalin basically did was he blockaded West Berlin so nobody could get there and nobody could leave. So you couldn't trade, you couldn't get food, you couldn't get electricity. He basically was trying to choke the life out of them so he could control that land. Now, the United States and England basically adopted a policy called containment, where we weren't going to fight World War III, but hell if we were going to let the Red expand into our area. So Truman, who was the president of the United States, instituted the Berlin Airlift. And basically what he did was, if I was a starving Berliner, all I had to do was look every day and chips, apples, electricity. They dropped tons of food and supplies in order to kind of challenge the Soviets. What are you going to do now? And eventually what they had to do was build the Berlin Wall, which separated West Berlin from East Berlin, and really becomes symbolic of what the Cold War is all about. Other events, we have the Korean War. A lot of this is the United States, so I want to be light on it because this is a world history course. But the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia to keep it in its camp. They formed a gang. Their bloods became the Warsaw Pact. And the United States and England joined NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And basically some of the concepts would be collective security. Why weren't there really big wars? Because everybody was in a gang. You also have the concept of mutual assured destruction or brinkmanship. Why wasn't there a war? Because everybody was packing. Everybody had nuclear weapons and nobody wanted to use them out of fear there would be retribution of weapons coming at them. And the Cold War went on from 1945 to like 1991. For those 50 or 60 years, everything in society is being defined by the Cold War. We have the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam conflict. You have the Marshall Plan, millions of dollars, billions going to Western Europe to rebuild their economies to stop the spread of communism. And basically that's the Cold War in a nutshell. The end of the Cold War is going to occur under the last leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev. So in the late 80s, Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union, the kind of head of the Communist Party. How many political parties in the Soviet Union? That's right, there's only one. There's only a communist. There's no democracy. So basically what occurred was Gorbachev was kind of cool. He was a little cooler, especially cooler than Stalin, but even the other leaders of Khrushchev and Brezhnev, he kind of had a little bit more of a democracy in his heart. So he thought that he could institute some freedoms and still be communist. That he still could command the economy. Remember, a command economy is when the government controls everything, unlike a laissez-faire government where the government doesn't do anything to control the economy. So Gorbachev developed two strategies. One was called glasnost, the opening up of freedom, and the other was perestroika, or economic freedoms, opening that door a little bit. Now, what occurred, and I think that this really will be the most theoretical way of answering the question of how the Cold War ended, because a lot of people say, we won. We won because we were tough. I don't think that's it. I'm more of the believer of that it was the M&M concept. That what occurred was when Gorbachev instituted some slight freedoms. It's like giving a kid an M&M. If you've never had freedom of the press, and I give you just a little bit, you're not going to be satisfied with one M&M. You're going to want the whole bag. Hell, you're going to want to own the factory that makes them. So opening up the Soviet Union really opened up the floodgates, and he couldn't control what happened. So basically Boris Yeltsin becomes the leader or the face of the reform movement. I almost see them charging at Gorbachev, give us our M&Ms. And eventually the Soviet Union flips. It breaks up into many little countries, or big and little countries, instead of being that union. It's almost like the United States of America, 50 little states make up the nation. Well, states made up the Soviet Union. So now we have Lithuania, and we have Georgia, and we have Russia, and we have lots of countries. So the breakup of the Soviet Union is definitely the way to see that the Cold War is over. And right before that occurred, the Berlin Wall came a-tumbling down, and that would be very symbolic of the Cold War being over. After the Cold War, the United States kind of becomes the superpower of the New World Order in the 1990s. Germany is unified, and Russia and Eastern Europe really have a lot of work to do to rebuild their economies, which were really devastated by years of a command economy and the lack of entrepreneurship and growth. So I don't know if that's going to do it. I mean, we really should mention Afghanistan, too. Afghanistan is the Soviet Union's Vietnam. They had invaded Afghanistan in order to make it communist, in a sense, and to have that land for development. As a response, the Afghans formed the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen was a collection of fighters from across the Arab world that were there to resist the atheist Soviet Union's invasion, including Osama bin Laden. The CIA gave, I think, $3 billion to the Mujahideen, including rocket launcher grenade things or whatever, to fight the Soviet Union. And they were successful. The Soviet Union finally pulled out, I think, in the late 80s out of Afghanistan. And now, we have Osama bin Laden with rocket propelled grenades and billions of dollars. But nevertheless, Afghanistan, Vietnam, I think we've talked enough. I hope you get the Cold War, the Soviet Union, communism versus England, the United States, democracy, capitalism, and that's all, folks. So keep studying a little bit at a time. Where attention goes, energy flows. Betty Bocker bought some butter, but she said that batter's bitter, so she bought some better butter and put the better butter in the bitter butter and made the bitter butter.